Thanks everyone for joining us. We're going to be live podcasting this as well, so shout out to all of you as we make this part of the Voice of Retail podcast. So settle in. We got a great session planned for you. We're going to talk about a little bit about Atomic Reach and their origin story. We're going to talk about AI and how that works, and then we're going to talk about creating killer content using AI. So we've got a great session planned for you. But why don't we go ahead and jump right in. Paul, tell us a little bit about yourself, your personal journey, what you do at Atomic Reach, and a little bit about Atomic Reach's origin story and how it came to be.
Sure. Well, first of all, thanks for having me. So I am VP of Strategy at Atomic Reach. I have a few different hats that I wear. I lead our business development, strategic partnerships, and marketing activities. My background is business development and strategic partnerships within the high-tech space. I've led business development with Research in Motion in the early days of BlackBerry, a company up in Ottawa called Bridgewater Systems that is now part of Amdocs, Tyco Security Products, and now Atomic Reach.
So it's a great background. So you were sharing with me over dinner last night a bit of the backstory behind Atomic Reach. So, you know, one of these startup companies that's not really a startup company and has an interesting backstory, which I think actually will inform our discussion, because it starts at there's an opportunity to be solved, and it's a gnarly problem, but how do we solve it? So tell us a little bit about Atomic Reach.
That's exactly right. So the company was originally formed back in 2012 as a content curation platform. So looking to supplement the internal digital content creation capabilities of enterprises with third-party freelancers that could create content. And as the CEO, Bradley Silver, was running that operation, he found there were times where he would procure a piece of content that would perform really well for a client, and times where he would procure a piece of content that wouldn't perform really well. But in each situation, it was well written, on a relevant topic, seemed to be
Couldn't
delivered.
really see a difference between the two contents.
And so he couldn't understand why one would perform and another wouldn't. And so he went out and talked to his clients, and he talked to other large publishers, and they all validated that, yes, we have this issue, but writing's an art. If something doesn't perform, you pull it down, you write a new piece, you publish it, and you track the results. And so at that time, he saw a fundamental challenge to the value proposition of Atomic Reach as it stood today. And so at that time, he wound down the content curation business, went into a heavy R&D mode, and wanted to see if he could introduce some science into the content creation process. And in particular, he thought that artificial intelligence, machine learning, natural language processing, natural language generation would be a good avenue to explore.
Big words. We're going to delve into what all that exactly means a little later in our chat together. But so Atomic Reach has been around. It's not an overnight. You've been going through millions of pieces of data and refining the AI code. That's been, how long have you been doing what you do today?
That's right. We went into R&D for about 4 to 5 years.
Okay.
And when I say R&D, that's all we did. There was no commercial aspect to the business at that time. And literally analyzed tens of millions of pieces of digital content, interacted with the people that were consuming that content, running focus groups, asking questions. Where does your eye go on the page? How does the content make you feel? Is the content familiar to you? And then going through that whole process again, slightly revising the content, and again, doing that research.
Over and over and over again.
And through that process, we identified about 100 different variables that impact reading comprehension and how people consume the written word.
So we're going to get later in our interview how you distill those down into something that's actually meaningful to understand for all of us.
That's right.
You know, kind of strip away all that. And typically I wouldn't spend so much time on the background of an organization, but it's meaningful that while it's kind of new to market, it's not new to what it's been doing. So now you're in market. Let's talk about, as you travel around and as you talk to C-level executives across North America and globally, what have you been hearing, and what are they saying that the challenges they face in content even from at a product level perspective?
Sure. So everyone's bought into the need for digital content, how it can be used as a tool to move customers through that customer journey, ultimately to that purchase decision. Everyone's reading the thought leadership out there today about the need to be able to connect with your consumer, connect at an emotional level.
Right at the product description, right? I mean, so
absolutely.
We've taken it, you know, the journey's been from a theoretical product content right down to product level content at the item detail level. So
That's right.
That's what I find so interesting about this. So, but what are the challenges that they face? So let's continue to talk about that.
Well, of course, there's a lot of data out there, and it's very difficult to be able to analyze that data and pull out the insights as a human.
Sure.
And we all have our own human bias as well, so our analysis is skewed, even though we might not realize it.
Right.
And the whole goal is to be able to personalize and speak to your customers. So you don't want your own personal influences to impact the content that you're putting in front of your customer. Right. You want it to be based on customer behavior, customer need, customer want, and make sure you're always providing value at every touch point.
And so when you talk to the merchants, they're saying, listen, we know it's relevant, so anyone in the room would know the content's relevant, but what are those things, whether it's they getting the content from a variety of sources, right? The content's coming in from the vendors. What are those things?
Yeah, so it's getting content. How do you have an objective way to evaluate the quality of the content? How do you make sure that it's going to reinforce your own corporate brand?
Right.
How do you make sure that your content's differentiated from other retailers' content that might be selling the same product if they're getting that original content from the manufacturer?
So the manufacturer sending the same content to a whole host of different.
That's right.
And I guess the real challenge, and I face this challenge as well in my career, where you're getting content, some is spectacular, right? The vendor is sending you just spectacular content, and you can basically cut, paste, and put it on, but others are sending less than spectacular content?
Exactly.
Right.
Some can be very specification driven, and it doesn't draw out the value and the benefits that the consumer is going to get from the product. And those are the types of things that you really want to be able to emphasize based on what you know about your consumer,
right,
what their needs and wants are, and how that particular product can fulfill that.
I guess it's also this combination of productivity and just at scale, right? So whether you already have a group of people pulling content together and trying to make it homogeneous on your site, so there's a scale issue. So it's really, I guess, a mix for merchants of, I'd rather have people doing something else if there was a solution. And I'd really like to have the content all look the same, feel the same, and talk the same way, right?
Yeah, so the challenges that marketers raise for us is, one, just the amount of content that they need, and how do they keep it fresh, and how can they produce that amount of content at scale? How can they manage all of the various writers that they might have under their purview? And again, making sure that it's quality content that's being published.
Right. And really at scale, right? So that
Absolutely.
And I keep coming back to that because really this solution and what you do and what the industry is able to do this at scale, because ultimately this can all, I think what's magical in a sense, what they say about great science is like magic is that there's now, through tools like this, an objective way to measure readability and content. We're going to get to how you do that later, but that's really what we're talking about.
That's right.
Right. Let's talk about AI, because you use some big words about what AI is and AI isn't. And I often get confused between what is AI and what is machine learning and what is just smart computers that have a lot of horsepower that do if-then kind of decision making. So,
Sure.
From your perspective, and we're not at a technological session, so we're not really going to delve into the code, but what are those key differences?
So first of all, machine learning is a subset of artificial intelligence, and at the most basic definition of artificial intelligence, it's building some intelligence into the machine. And that could be, as you say, very complex if-then problem statements, or it could be something a bit more complex. The machine learning aspect of it is the ability for the machine to learn based on new data that it's analyzing without the need for programming to take place. So based on how the data is changing and how the patterns are changing within that data, being able to bring to light new insights that perhaps the machine wasn't looking for in the past.
So I guess couple of the inherent advantages of this AI are, the fact that it's a prediction machine, right? It's a very good predicting at what it does, but it also takes some bias out.
That's right.
Right, and human bias is probably a pretty big factor in your world.
That's right, and you
In our
try
world today.
you try to address that by taking large data sets from multiple sources to try and remove any of those types of biases that might exist.
Right. So you've got scale, you eliminate the bias, and then you got the predictive power. But how do you train AI? Like, I hear that you need to train your AI to, and isn't there inherent bias in that training, and how do you kind of overcome that?
So it really starts to come to the underlying R&D and IP that the AI algorithms are built upon. So at Atomic Reach, with all of the research that we did and those 100 variables that I had mentioned that impact reading comprehension, we identified a subset of 23 variables of those 100 that correlate to customer behavior and customer engagement at a 97% accuracy rate. And so we built our AI algorithms around all of those different variables. So that when it looks at a piece of content, it's doing an analysis, looking for those variables in order to start to identify patterns and draw some conclusions.
So it's really more than just a basic programming. It's actually continuing to ingest content.
That's right.
And you're training it to recognize.
That's right. And you need to
difference.
continue to feed data into the machine because customer behavior changes over time. And so as your customer behavior changes...
And the targets are different, right? So
that's right.
You know, for the retailers in the room, you're all going to have slightly different targets. So so the machine, the tools, let's stop calling it a machine, you know, these tools can kind of start to learn based on what you teach it about the segments and profiles and
yeah, so
objectives.
we've built our AI algorithms based on all of that content that we analyzed during our R&D phase, and then you start to feed in the retailer's own data based on their own results, their own engagement data that they have with their customers, and then the machine starts to tailor the insights and the analysis based on that particular retailer's data.
So when you say engagement data, you're talking about click-throughs, conversion rates.
Yeah, click-through, conversion rates, time on page, open rates for email campaigns, really anything that you would track within Google Analytics or any other kind of business intelligence platform that the retailer might use. You could layer demographic data on top of that, geolocation data to identify how different content resonates with different customer bases based on where they're located on the globe or demographically. So there's lots of different things that you can do based on the amount of data that you can feed into the engine.
Okay. So let's try to ground this in what you actually do, this killer content. Because at one aspect, we're talking about that content at the product detail level. There's also other content you can use it for, whether it's blog content or other content that this tool kind of senses. But you've done some work, you've done some great work. Let's talk about that. So how do I take this and unpack this and make this real for retailers and the retailers outside?
Sure. So, I mean, what we found, and it's validated from all the various psychologists out there, is that humans make decisions based on emotion. We might like to think that we're very logical, but the stat is about 80% of the decisions that we made are made based on emotion, not based on objective, logical decision making. And so we found in all of our research, it's very important for that content to be able to connect with the consumer at that human level, making sure that it's the right emotional tone, evoking the right response, and is going to resonate with them.
So really back to the origin story, that's the difference between subjective analysis and more objective analysis.
That's right.
Right?
Yeah.
And you'll all see that when we get to looking at some of the examples. Some of the tweaks are so subtle that we're going to have to call them out to bring it forward, right?
And that's the other thing that we found. The nuance between language and what might resonate with me versus yourself versus someone else in the crowd here is very, very subtle. And when you look at two versions of a piece of content, you might not be able to really determine what's going to perform better because you really might think, it's really the same.
Right.
You know, you've swapped out a synonym for one word versus another. But it's actually much more complex. But unless you can analyze the millions of pieces of data points, you really don't have the ability to identify those patterns and draw those insights out.
Yeah, retailers are telling us every day that they're turning their minds to not just getting traffic in their site, but actually increasing the conversion. And ultimately, that's what your tool does. So let's see the work you did. Let's introduce the work you did with Golftown.
Sure. So Golftown, we were able to sit down with Freddie Lecoq, and anyone who knows Freddie knows that he's a very innovative and sometimes controversial marketer, but he's always open to looking at new technologies and seeing how that can how we can leverage those technologies within the business. And once he heard about the value proposition of Atomic Reach and the ability to customize product content, everywhere from product descriptions to blogs that you might be writing about content about different products or email marketing campaigns, he thought there was a big opportunity for retailers in general, not just Golftown, to really start to look at product descriptions. Because large retailers with thousands and thousands of SKUs, they just don't have the time and the ability to be able to filter through each one of those SKUs and look at how can I optimize that particular product description for that SKU.
And you've also found, interestingly, and I don't know, it'd be interesting in the room, who owns product content at that level, right? Is it the merchants? Is it the vendors sending it through to the machine? Is it the marketers? Is it the e-commerce merchants, right? So in some cases, unfortunately, the answer is no one owns that. It just kind of flows through. But in other cases, it's a real variety. So that's one of the conversations you got in with.
Exactly. So in the case of Golftown, it comes from the manufacturer. And the only thing Golftown does is they'll translate it from English into French.
So other than that, they don't really change the data, good, bad, or indifferent.
That's right.
I mean, when I was with, I spent a lot of time with the shopping channel, and 10, 20,000 SKUs on the site, 500 new SKUs a week. And it really flowed through from the vendors through the merchant group. But as the marketing team, we would say, well, let's just look at the one or two items. That's all we can kind of spend time to look at. But deep within the site, you'd stumble across product descriptions that are a bit wonky or
that's right.
uploaded strangely. And,
yeah,
and you
it
really
just didn't make sense.
I didn't have a team. Couldn't build a team big enough to go crawling through all that kind of
exactly
all that information. Same issue with Freddie, right?
Yeah. So Freddie thought that product descriptions, because they weren't looking at them today, that it could be kind of low-hanging fruit, where if they could do some basic optimization, they could start to drive some real results. And so we looked at 5,000 different product descriptions, and we put those product descriptions through our platform. And the AI algorithm does its initial analysis and starts to draw out some insights.
So talk about that a bit. So first it starts to rate it on some basic readability and sentence structure, things like some very...
Yeah, so we
build that foundation.
We try to break the analysis down into things that are easily understood by the human. So the two core things we look at are readability and emotion. And when I talk about readability, we're talking about the complexity of the language, complexity of how many syllables to words, how many words to the sentences to paragraphs.
How long the paragraphs are.
Exactly, the vocabulary used, those sorts of things.
I always make, when I write copy, I always make the mistake of being too promotional. Like I'm always trying to sell in the copy. And actually what I learned through looking at this is sometimes that doesn't always, like you're trying to make it, like we're all trying to make exciting, interesting content from what we have, but that isn't all, and that's part of that readability measure?
Well, that would fall more under the emotional side of the measure. The readability is, what we find the biggest impact is how much knowledge of the subject does the reader have. And if the reader has a high level of knowledge, then they want language that is more complex. Because they understand the nuances and the details of the particular subject. If it's someone that doesn't have a lot of knowledge, then they want something written at a general level where they understand the terms that are used within the content, and it's not something that they have to go and look up and try to figure out what is the content actually telling me.
So how is it that you determine that from the data? Like that's the part that I haven't been able to connect in my mind.
So the first step that we do when we work with a client is we consume their historical content that they've published in the past.
Product descriptions,
product descriptions, blogs, web pages.
And how much can you consume? Basically an infinite amount.
Yeah, the more the better. But at the same time, the marketing strategy of a retailer is going to change over time. So if they've been doing something in the past that really isn't relevant today, you might not want to look at that content.
Okay.
So We'll consume the historical content and the associated engagement metrics, and then we'll come back to the retailer and start to share some of the insights.
And again, those engagement metrics, that's click-throughs, time on page.
Yeah, purchases, pricing information, discounts, all of those sorts of things. And then we'll start to identify the patterns of high-performing content versus low-performing content. And then we'll work with the retailer to look at how do you really want to kind of slice and dice this data? Do you want to look at it from a regional perspective, from a customer persona perspective, from a demographic perspective? And then we'll start to build what we call content profiles that are meant to achieve a specific marketing objective. And based on that marketing objective, we'll tell you what should that content look like.
And the ultimate objective is to sell.
That's right.
I mean, you know, we talk about marketing objectives, but ultimately we're all in the business to make sure that.
Ultimately, the goal is to move that consumer through the journey to the purchase point. But again, we see all the stats of 7, 8 different touch points before the consumer actually makes a purchase.
Sure.
So you need to make sure that your content is going to be relevant for where they are within that customer journey. So again, we can work with the retailer to look at how have you used your content in the past? Was it to build awareness? Was it to try and get someone to actually, click on the buy button?
Sure.
What is it that you've done? And then we can look at how has that content performed relative to that particular objective.
So I'm just looking at the screen. So in this case, you've got, as you said, you've got readability and emotion, and those things are actually, kind of catchment phrases for hundreds of different things you look at. You were even telling me about
That's
how
right.
there's some sentences, whether it's a noun that goes first or second in the
So
sentence structure. Like it gets so granular that I don't even want to go too far deep into it, but
Yes.
but it all rolls up into these two kind of key things, right?
That's right. And so with the Golf Town example, after analyzing the 5,000 different product descriptions, we then narrowed focus for this proof of concept. And we looked at 2 different product categories, men's golf clubs and ladies golf clubs. And then based on the analysis that we did of those 2 different product categories, what we found was that for men's golf clubs, the ideal readability and emotion was academic for readability and exciting for emotion. And for female golf clubs, it was readability of specialist and emotion of calm.
So unpack that for us. What's the difference between academic and specialist? I mean, part of it is your criteria, but can you give us a sense of layman's, what does that mean?
So we grade readability on 5 different levels. General would be the most basic, so someone who doesn't have a lot of knowledge about the subject matter, to knowledgeable, specialist, academic, and genius.
And again, you can tell that readability by just the way they're interacting with the product?
Yeah, so we can tell based on looking at the historical content and grading that content. Was that content written at an academic level or a general level? And then how did that content perform based on the objective? And so you're going to, based on the amount of content that you analyze, you're going to have content that was written in a bunch of different ways, that was meant to achieve a different marketing objective, that performed in a different way.
I like this example because you basically have, if you peel back the example, you've got basically the same brands giving you the content. So the content
That's
in this
right.
case is kind of held static, right? So you don't have 2 different suppliers. You've got 2 different sets of clubs from the same sets of providers, right?
That's right. And yeah, some might be targeted at the novice that hasn't picked up and swung a club before to, the person that thinks they're going to be the next player on the PGA.
Okay, so what happened? You took this data,
So we
specialist,
took this data, we analyzed those 270 product descriptions, we came up with what the ideal way for those product descriptions to be written was. We then optimize those product
And
descriptions.
again, this is all machine driven.
This is all machine driven, that's right. So the machine then took those 270 product descriptions and rewrote them.
So what you're telling us here in this room is that the machine wrote the product description.
That's right, and it rewrote the product descriptions to match those different categories. So for men's product descriptions, men's golf clubs, it was written at the academic and exciting for the emotional tone, and for female clubs, specialists, and calm.
So are we at the cusp of AI writing novels here?
No, we're not quite there yet, but certainly down the road, you're going to get to the point where the machine will be able to write long-form content. You'll be able to put in a topic, you'll be able to put in some keywords and key terms, and a few different parameters, and the machine will get there eventually.
Eventually. So it'll be great until then. Then it's Judgment Day, and then it's kind of all over. But until then, it'll be great. All right, so let's take a look at what you learned and how it performed, because
Sure.
this really gets down to how the machine changed the product description, right?
That's right. So here you see a description for a women's golf club, the original on the left, the optimized description on the right. The words that are highlighted in blue were the words that were changed.
So for the listeners at home, since we're doing on a podcast, I wouldn't ordinarily do this. So the original content on the first one, Speed Pocket in the 4 through 7 irons works with an advanced ultra-thin face design to promote consistently high ball speed and distance. But the machine wrote it to say what?
The machine wrote it to say, Speed Pocket in the 4 through 7 irons works with a sophisticated ultra-slim face design to promote consistently high ball speed and distance.
So it changed advanced and ultra-thin to sophisticated and ultra-slim. Seems almost meaningless.
Exactly.
Right.
You know, how you would differentiate
to the human eye, it seems almost meaningless.
between those two product descriptions as to what would perform better. I think it's very debatable.
So the next example, so we got 3. The weight is strategically redistributed to lower and center the CG location. And then
And that was optimized to read, weight is ideally distributed to lower and center the CG location, promoting a higher launch angle, higher peak trajectory, etc.
so basically it changed strategically to ideally.
That's right.
Right? And this again is based on sentiment and all these hundred of variables. Now the third example, fantastic feel promoted by specially formulated polyurethane developed by 3M. And the machine wrote it. It's hard for you to see until you're blocked. I'll read it out. Fantastic feel promoted by an exceptionally devised. So from specially formulated to exceptionally devised. It doesn't seem like a big difference.
That's right. But again, the underlying IP and one of the things that differentiates Atomic Reach is not only the AI and the ability to do all this analysis, it's the fact that it's built on top of a customer behavior model. And we really understand how the words correlate to customer engagement and customer behavior. So the words that we've changed on the page are the words that we know will actually get the customer to take an action. In this case, actually make a purchase.
So the win is on the screen again for the listeners at home. So by making these subtle changes in those 200 odd SKUs, measured fairly rigorously, like for like, same time period, not one was on sale and the other, 7.29% increase in sales.
That's right. We were able to
It's almost hard to believe. I mean,
Yeah.
that such subtle changes could yield, 7% is not nothing, so to speak, right?
Exactly. I think any retailer that could say they'd get 7% organic growth would be pretty happy.
Interesting. When I first saw this, I couldn't imagine how such subtle words, I could get it in paragraphs and phrasings, but even those subtle words, it's great. In the time we have left today, how do retailers in the room, retailers listening, get started on a journey of understanding if this is right for them, looking at their product content, whether they're coming at it from, they don't like the content, it's variable, it's mixed, or they just want to see, they think they got great content, but kind of some days we all think we got great content.
Yeah, I think it's always nice to try have an objective way to measure the content and validate your gut instinct.
Yeah.
Do I have good content or do I have content that can be improved?
Yeah.
And then I would really encourage marketers and retailers to start to do some trials and proof of concepts. Don't try boil the ocean. Look at a specific marketing objective and some of the content that you've used to try and achieve that, and see if you can start to drive some improved performance by leveraging some of these AI technologies that exist today.
And then it's interesting as you see the whole industry of content management starting to overlay on e-commerce. There's many people in the industry starting to point their minds to this.
Yeah.
'Cause this is not new yeah, I guess it's new, but it's not new in the content, big publishing world, right? They've been doing some of this unbeknownst to us, really. They've been optimizing content, but now it seems many are turning their minds to helping retailers start to do that, even at this product detail level, right?
Exactly.
So for retailers in the room and retailers listening, what do you advise even to start with, or starting with Atomic Reach? What's a first step? How do you take them through that?
Sure. So the first thing that we like to do is obviously sit down with the marketing team and really understand what's your marketing strategy. How do you use digital content today? And then what are some of the problems that you have? And as we spoke about earlier in the session, they tend to be scale, operational efficiencies, and improved quality and performance.
And do you do a proof of concept?
Yeah.
What's the first step, though? Because you actually will do something, a quick
look.
look.
We'll do a proof of concept with retailers. We try to keep them within a 30-day time period. And the first step is to look at a particular content asset type, whether it be product descriptions or some other form of content. We'll do an initial analysis of that content and that content's associated engagement data. And then we'll sit down with the retailer and walk them through the insights that we've been able to expose.
And you're offering an audit.
That's right.
As a very first step, right?
Yeah, that's what we call it, a content audit or a product description audit, where, again, we could, similar to what we did with Golf Town, we can look at a specific product category and how we can optimize those product descriptions, the insights that we'll reveal by doing that analysis, and then how to actually apply those insights to your business to start to drive some results. Okay. And it's really all about creating some new content, applying those insights to optimize that content, publishing, and tracking results.
Okay. So for those interested, how do they get a hold of you?
So you can find us online, of course, at www.atomicreach.com. You can reach out directly to me at paulroscoe@atomicreach.com. And I'm sure if you're reached out to RCC, they'd be happy to connect you as well.